What's up, everybody? It is Peaceful here. We have got a lot to cover today. We got a new card coming out in Hercules. We got a huge patch today with a lot of buffs and nerfs. But how impactful are they actually going to be? Huh? I guess we'll talk about that in a minute. And we got some bundles coming out this week. I'm going to go over all of that today for you in this Marvel Snap video. So if you haven't already and you enjoy this sort of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss any other upcoming videos. But let's go ahead and get into it. First up, we got Hercules. This is a 4/6. He says the first time another card moves here each turn, move it to another location. So we are going to go over, I did this last time and we had a couple comments saying that y'all really enjoyed this. So we're going to go over some of the lore behind Hercules within Marvel Snap. Yes, he is based off of the Hercules of Greek mythology. He is the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmena, I think is how you pronounce that. I'm not really sure. So anyway, yep, that's where that's the Zeus heritage. Again, it is based off of Greek mythology. Much of his Marvel backstory also mirrors his Greek the stories from Greek mythology, including the completion of the 12 labors. That's where he fought the Hydra and stuff like that. If any of you remember the Hercules Disney movie, that's where I know that stuff from. Was mesmerized at one point by Enchantress and set against the Avengers. Fought the Avengers, lost badly, and they broke the enchantment on him and ended up defeating Enchantress as well. He spent some of his time as an Avenger. He actually challenged Baron Zemo's team by himself, got absolutely wrecked, was put into a coma, and Zeus blamed the Avengers, sent them all to Hades. So, yeah, the Avengers at one point got sent to hell. Pretty funny. And it wasn't until Hercules woke up from his coma and explained to his father that it wasn't their fault, that it was him being, basically full of himself and thinking he could take them by himself that got him in trouble, that he let the Avengers out of Hades. So, uh, Hercules not quite as heroic in Marvel the Marvel comics as he is in the Greek mythology. He has had his moments where he was very brash and very full of himself, and then he's also sort of a ladies' man. He's gotten himself in trouble that way as sometimes as well. But his card in Marvel Snap is interesting. It's a move card that requires you to move cards in another way before he gets value. I think the main way you'll see him see play is a synergy with the new Kingpin and Craven. So we'll go over the new Kingpin again in the buffs and nerfs section. But basically, the new Kingpin says he's a 2/3. This is when an enemy card moves to his location, they get afflicted with -2 power. This is sort of something they're trying. Again, we'll get into my thoughts on that change once we get to that page. But I kind of see that being the shell where you'll want to use Hercules, as then you can have Hercules on a lane with one of those two cards. Let's say you put him on the same lane as Craven, and then you have Kingpin in another lane. You play Spider-Man in another lane, pull a card to the Hercules lane. That card gets bumped out, gets maybe bumped into the Kingpin lane. You get a whole bunch of buffs on your Craven and a whole bunch of debuffs on their cards with Kingpin. Stuff like that. That's really the only use case I see for him. I think this card's kind of weird. It's really cool and really flavorful. Hercules is strong. He's a god. So, cards come in his area. He's just like, nah, he throws them out. So I love the design from that point. And I don't think every card in Marvel Snap needs to be the best card ever. This card, however, I don't see a ton of use cases for it. So basically what it comes down to is how much do you enjoy the move archetype in Marvel Snap? If you're somebody who's going to play the move archetype a ton, if you already play with a lot with Spider-Man, with Polaris, with, your Cravens and your Ghost Spiders and your Iron Fists and stuff like that, then sure, the Hercules is probably a card worth picking up for you. But is it going to be a meta-defining card? I don't think so. All right. I think this is a card that if you're somebody who's careful with your tokens and stuff like that, you should probably pass on. I did put together a deck for you. I do think he is an interesting card, and I'm looking forward to trying him out in something like this. You'll see that there's some choices you're probably like, wait, why is this here? I was kind of going for sort of a tempo mid-range shell like we've seen in the past with Legion and Doctor Doom as your over-the-top cards that really can win you those lanes kind of unexpectedly. You'll see Quakes in here. I think you're going to see Quake in just basically every deck moving forward until probably the next balance patch when they nudge her one way or the other, because her ability on a 2/3 is kind of crazy. We'll go over that again when we go over the buffs and nerfs. But other than that, this is basically a move shell. You've got, remember, Kingpin is a 2/3, so the curve is actually a little better than it looks here. So you got Kingpin down at the 2s. You got a bunch of move synergies. I went all in on the move synergies here. I didn't go for a good card sort of deck. I wanted to see, or I wanted to give you a deck that really puts Hercules to use to try out. So I think this deck looks like a ton of fun. You basically curve out with a bunch of move stuff. You got Hercules to kind of give you like your all in. Like when you have Hercules, you're gonna play this a little bit differently. You're not gonna play Legion on 5 or Doom on 6. You're probably gonna play your move cards then. But overall, I do think this deck has the ability to keep up with a lot of the more mid tier decks in Marvel Snap. It's probably not going to keep up with most of the top tier decks, but it's going to be a ton of fun. And messing with your opponent's Miss Marvel and stuff like that is going to be pretty good. So yeah, definitely going to give this one a try myself, and hopefully y'all enjoy this one as well. All right, we're gonna go ahead and go over a couple of the bundles coming out this week. So first up, you got Kings in the Castle. This is $30. You cannot use gold on this one, but for $30, you get 2 variants and their avatars. You get boosters to upgrade each of them once. You get a gold conquest ticket, and you get 4,000 gold. So just based on the gold alone, this bundle is a very good deal. So you have my full recommendations to pick this one up. There's not a lot else to say. If you like the variants, this is an amazing deal. If you don't like the variants, this is still better than buying gold. So again, as I say every time I do these bundle videos, if you are someone who spends money on Snap, this is a good bundle to pick up. You get really good value for your money. Now, if you're not somebody who normally spends money on Snap, don't buy it. Pretty simple. Next up, we have the Artist Showcase bundle for this week. It is an ink pulp artist showcase. They're one of the newer artists that we've seen to Marvel Snap. They've had a couple cards come out in the spotlight bundles, like the Negasonic Teenage Warhead, which I absolutely love. That's one of my favorite variants in all of Snap. And these are 2 really cool pieces of art. However, this is really bad bundle. All right, for your 4,200 gold, you're getting some tokens and you're getting the 2 variants. So if you don't like these variants, this is a horrible deal. If you like the variants and you value them at like 1,200 each, then this is okay. You can go ahead and pick it up. If you would like, that's sort of the thing with a lot of these bundles. They're almost aimed at people who would pick up these variants anyway if they saw them in the shop. And so you don't get a ton of extra value with them. It's a shame because I think I'm probably going to pass on this one because I already have a Mojo and an Invisible Woman I really love. But I would love to have these, and it's just the value on this is just too bad for me to justify picking it up. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this. If you don't have a good Invisible Woman or Mojo variant and you just want to pick these up, go ahead. It's probably gonna be pretty good for you to get those for a decent value. But even then, you're paying like almost 2,000 gold for the tokens. So it depends on how much you need the tokens for cards. Me personally, I'm gonna have every card after the series drop this week, so this is kind of useless to me. All right, last thing we're going to talk about today, and probably the thing that most of you are most interested in watching, is the buffs and nerfs that came out today. Oh man, there's a lot of them, and there are nerfs to a lot of the most prominent cards in the metagame. But how impactful are they going to be? Let's go over it. So the first one, and this is the one I actually thought was going to be the most impactful before some additional information came out. Loki now transforms the cards in your hand instead of replaces. So basically, uh, originally we all thought when the leak happened, I don't know, for any of you who follow Marvel Snap very closely, there was a leak last week where a lot of these changes were leaked. I didn't do a video on it because I don't like cover leaks, even though Second Dinner basically confirmed, yeah, this was an actual leak. You're welcome to talk about it. I was like, some of it could change. I didn't want to go into things until I knew exactly what it was going to be. But this was one of the leak changes. And basically, at the time, we thought this was going to work against both Collector and Quinjet, meaning it no longer works with a Collector, which is still true, but it also wouldn't work with Quinjet, meaning because the cards were transformed instead of replaced, they were still technically the same cards that started in your deck. So unless they had already been generated from another card by some other means, they weren't going to get discounted as well by Quinjet, which was a huge deal. Having, some of the cards not get double discounted was definitely going to weaken the power of Loki in general, which is really what we were all looking for. And Loki already is not the most prominent deck in the metagame. Some of the other changes they made have kind of had it fall down a little bit overall in the metagame, partially just because I don't think a lot of people don't want to play it. But they did announce that Quinjet is now going to work differently with transformed cards than it did before. So basically now it only doesn't work with Collector. It still gets the discount from Quinjet, which means that this is not as impactful as I think they're hoping it's going to be. I actually kind of am a little disappointed with this change because we're seeing Loki decks move away from the pure Collector card generation strategy, and you have these what they call good cards decks that were just running Loki because sometimes you play Loki and steal all your opponent's cards and win, And then sometimes you don't need to, and you can just curve out, and then you just play Loki maybe on turn 6 as just extra stats. Like a lot of people playing him in like a Zabu shell. And those decks are still going to be fine. They're going to work the exact same way they did before. Maybe they have to replace Collector with something else, if they were even running Collector. But the core thing that makes Loki an unfun card to play against still exists. So I'm not super excited about this change. Some of the other changes we got with Miss Marvel, she's now a 4/4, so they did not shave a power off of her. And then her lanes, the adjacent lanes that get buffed now require at least 2 cards in those lanes to get those buffs. So it's hard for me to say how impactful this is. It makes it worse specifically in lockdown, which makes me happy. That's a good thing. But other than that, like a lot of the other decks running Miss Marvel, this doesn't matter much. And they've said that they did this basically for 2 reasons: to make Miss Marvel a little bit weaker, but also because this is how a lot of people assumed she would work in the first place. So to make her a little more intuitive. Uh, it's it's funny because they say that, but then they just added a bunch of text to her card, so it makes her seem a little more confusing. But I do get where they're coming from. Like they're trying to make her work in a way that people sort of expected her to work in the first place. It is a nerf. Now here's the problem. This is also really good for Sarah decks, which are already some of the more powerful decks running Miss Marvel other than Lockdown in the game. You've seen these Sarah decks cropping up with Miss Marvel in it that use her on the last turn with Sarah for a really cheap 15 power, basically a Doctor Doom that you get to play for half the price with Sarah in play. And those decks are going to love this change because now you can play Miss Marvel on curve, and as long as you don't have 2 cards in the other lanes, you get to hide that power. It's basically you have 10 power on board that's just chilling. It's not showing, it's not impacting your priority, which means that your reactive tech cards still get to work on turn 6, which is kind of disgusting. But other than that very specific use case, I do think this is definitely a nerf, and I like to see it because Miss Marvel is already one of the strongest cards in the game. Annihilus has gone from a 5/7 to a 5/6, and now only works with cards below 0 power. So no more rocks or anything like that. No more playing, uh, no more playing Man Thing into a lane and then using that to shrink some of your cards to 0 and then shifting them over. You have to shrink them below 0. So a good change. It's kind of funny because it really just weakens it against other stuff, where most of the time people play Annihilus right now, it's with just 0 and Sentry. So the on reveal doesn't matter at all that it changed. The less power does, but it is kind of funny that this really only hurts the other strategies it was working with a little bit, or it hurts the other strategies that this was working with a lot more than it does the main way people are playing it. So that's a nerf, but it's kind of like I don't know. It's kind of sad to see it get hit in a way that makes it worse for basically every other deck except the most important one. Dracula has been changed to a 4/1, and he now gains the power at the end of the game instead of changing his power to that. So this is a big deal, and not strictly a buff, which I think is what they were hoping for. Now, like things like Cyclops, things like some of some locations that inflict negative power, like Jotunheim, things like that now are worse with Dracula, whereas it used to be you could play a Dracula into a Cyclops lane, knowing that at the very end of the game, after everything else is triggered, you would get that Dracula trigger and you get a big powered card. Now, if Dracula's a 4 -6 because it's been sitting, or -5 or whatever, because it's been sitting there with Cyclops and Thing debuffing its power, it's still going to have those debuffs when the game ends. And that's kind of sad. But overall, I mean, it is a buff. It has an extra power and it does gain the power, so it can technically be bigger than it used to be. So I'm interested to see how this one plays out, but I don't think this one's going to matter as much as they probably are hoping. Next up, we have some exciting ones. Angel now will hop from your hand as well as deck. A big deal. This card was basically unplayable before. Maybe now it finds a niche somewhere where you don't mind because you draw it and it still will hop into play. Seems like a pretty simple change, something that honestly people have been asking for a long time. I like it. I don't think this makes this suddenly a meta defining or like an auto include and destroy decks or anything like that, but it is still a good change, and I'm happy to see it. Quake now has the on reveal of swap the positions of the other 2 locations. So no longer has to be played in the middle, and now you have more control over where the locations end up and where they're going to be. And I think this card's crazy. I think it's basically on the power level of something like Legion, just for 2 and it's kind of insane. I'm excited to see how it's used because that to me isn't extremely obvious just yet. The biggest use case I think most people have seen and that I kind of hate is the use case with Storm, but like that's not as big of a deal as I think people are making it out to be because it's still one of those weird things where maybe you get them, but also it's like how does the curve work, right? Are you gonna if you play a storm into a lane with nothing else, they probably are gonna see what's up and know what you're doing and play around this, right? So I don't think that's the best use case for it. I just think Quake's going to be a really good card. Like something like Death Domain with Quake is going to be insane. You can play her onto one of the other locations, swap Death Domain to a location where you're already very far ahead, and it's just like she basically wins an entire lane for you by herself, which is kind of crazy. I think this is probably the best or the biggest buff they did this patch. It's crazy. I think this card's going to see a lot of play. Kingpin is going from a 2/2 or a 3/4 to a 2/3 when an enemy card moves here afflicted with -2 power. And at first I thought I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I kind of hate this change. It's basically just a worse Craven, right? Because Craven already buffs off of your enemy cards getting moved there, but it gives him plus power. And this one is just basically only works with enemy cards and it gives them negative power. Like if you're running a deck that wants this effect, you might run this and Craven, but when are you ever going to run this over Craven, right? And that's my big issue with it. I don't think this is a super exciting change. I would have if they had made it like a 2/2 that gave -3, then things start to get interesting because you have a reason to run it over Craven. If you're playing a deck that moves cards, your enemy cards a lot, then this is going to matter a lot. But basically, right now, I don't think you run this unless you want a second Craven that's slightly worse, and that it's better than where it's at right now. But at least old Kingpin had some unique cases where you could play something like Juggernaut plus Kingpin to sort of scam two lanes at the end of the game. That was at least interesting and something that other cards couldn't do. Now that's just a lot worse. So I don't know. We'll see. I like moving it in this direction. I just don't think this is enough to get it to see play. That's going to wrap it up for me today. Covered a lot today. Went over a lot of different stuff. We went over, the new card Hercules. We went over all the bundles. We went over the buffs and the nerfs. Let me know what you think about everything in the comments. Let me know if you're picking up either of the bundles. Let me know what cards you're excited to try out after their changes. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.